Hello, welcome to WDH. If you're tired of AI generated slop and want the real human storytelling, please subscribe to support this channel. My name is Maria and I'll be your narrator. Let's get into the story now. In the heart of the Arizona desert, where the sun burns like a forgotten promise and the wind carries the whispers of the dead, there was a warrior, the most feared, the most respected, the one every father wanted for his daughter and every enemy dreaded in the battle. His name was Koda, and on the day he was supposed to choose the most beautiful woman in the tribe, he chose her, the quiet one, the broken one, the one nobody ever looked at twice, and they laughed. Oh, how they laughed! But not one of them knew his reason. Not one of them knew what he had seen that cold, silent night, and 3 winters ago. Stay with me because the story will change the way you see strengthened forever. The sun had barely risen over the red cannon wall when the drums began. It was choosing day, the most sacred tradition of the epic people, the day when a warrior of the rank would step forward and choose his life partner. The entire village had gathered, the women dressed in their finest deer skin, flowers braided into their hair, eyes bright with hope and quiet desperation. Every girl knew the Koda would be choosing today. Koda, son of the great chief Ahano. Koda, who had won 17 battles before his 25th year. Koda, whose army was marked with the scars that told stories braver men never lived to tell. He was everything a woman could want and everything an enemy feared. As he walked through the crowd, every girl stood a little straighter. Every woman, every mother whispered prayers under her bonnet. He passed the first row, the beautiful daughters of the elders, adorned and prepared and ready. He passed the second row, the strong women, the skilled ones, the ones who could ride the horses and build fires in the storm. And still he kept walking. Then he stopped at the very edge of the crowd. Standing slightly apart from everyone else was Ayana. Nobody had ever expected her to come. She wore no flowers. Her dress was plain and mended at them. Her eyes were cast downwards as they always were, as if she had long ago decided she was not worth looking at. She had a slight limp from a childhood fall that had never healed quite right. She had no mother to braid her hair, no father to speak proudly of her. She lived alone at the edge of the village in a small dwelling that the winter wind threatened to take every season. And Koda walked straight to her. He stood before her, and in a voice that carries across the entire silent crowd, he said, Emma, I choose you for one single breath. The floor, the world was completely silent, and then the laughter came. And then the laughter came. It started as a murmur, then a sneer, then it broke open like a summer storm, loud, cruel, and unstoppable. Men shook their hands in disbelief. Women covered their mouths but did not hide their smiles. Even some of the elders exchanged the glances that said their lips would not. The whispers moved through the crowd like wildlife through dry desert grass. Has the warrior lost his mind? Of all the women he chose to broken up. She has barely walked. She has nothing. She is nothing. Anna felt every word like a stone thrown at her chest. She had spent her entire life being invisible, and somehow this moment being chosen was more painful than being ignored because she could see on their faces that being chosen by Koda was not an honor they believed she deserved. It was a joke they did not yet understand. She looked after him, and her dark eyes, wide with the confusion and something dangerously close to her. She whispered so only he could see. Koda, You do not have to do this. They are right. I have nothing to offer you. And Koda looked at her with an expression so calm, so certain, so unmovable that it silenced something deep inside her. He said, "You have already given me the only thing that has mattered. You just do not remember." She had no idea what he meant, but she would. Before the story of the story, every single person who laughed at it would understand too. What nobody knew, what nobody had ever been told, was that what happened on a frozen night 3 winters before choosing a day. A night so cold the stars themselves seemed to shiver. Koda had been returning alone from a scouting mission deep in the northern canyon. He had been gone for the 6 days. He was exhausted, half frozen, and carrying a wound on his left side from an enemy arrow that had grazed him on the second day. He had not told anyone about it, about that wound. Warriors did not speak of wound, but this one had been quietly stealing his strength with every mile, and by the time the cannonballs began to look familiar, his body was beginning to betray him. He fell, not dramatically, not ironically, just quietly in the snow, like a man who had finally run out of this fight. And he lay there in the freezing dark, alone, too weak to rise, his breath coming in the shallow clouds that disappeared into the black sky. He was going to die there, he knew. And strangely, in that moment, he was not at all afraid. He was only tired. His eyes were closed and let the cold wrap around him like a blanket. And then he heard the footsteps, small, uneven, the sound of someone who walked with a slight limp. He forced his eyes open and saw a figure moving through the snow towards him, carrying a small bundle of firewood and a skin of water. It was Iana. She had been gathering wood alone at the edge of the forest, something no woman was supposed to do at that hour. In that cold, in that darkness, she had been doing it because she had no one to gather it for her. And she had seen him fall. She could have turned back. The smart thing, the safe thing would have been to go to the bank, go back to the village and send the others. But she did not. She came to him alone in the dark without hesitation. She built a fire with the frozen fingers that shook so deeply she dropped the flint 3 times. She cleaned his wound with the hands that were gentle in a way that surprised him. She gave him her own hand. She gave him her own water, her own warmth, sitting beside that small fire through the entire night, keeping it alive, keeping them alive, never once complaining, never once making him feel weaker for needing her. When the first gray light of the dawn touched the cannon wall, she helped him to his feet, and her only words to him were, "Can you walk now?" Not, "You owe me." Not, "Just remember this." Just, "Can you walk now?" He never forgot, not for a single day of the 3 years that followed. He never forgot. And he never told a soul because he had never told a soul. She has saved the life of the tribe's greatest warrior and walked back to her small dwelling at the edge of the village and said nothing as if it meant nothing. And if she meant nothing, and that quiet, selfless, unwitnessed courage was more beautiful to Koda than anything he had ever seen on a choosing day. After he chose her, the days that followed were not easy. The village did not hide its disapproval. Women who had hoped to be chosen turned out to be cold and distant. Men questioned Koda's judgment quietly among themselves, wondering if the great warrior had perhaps been touched by some desert madness. Even his own uncle came to him privately and said, "Koda, there is still time to change this. Nobody would blame you." Koda looked at his uncle for a long moment and said, "I would blame me?" And that was the end of that conversation. But Ayana suffered more quietly than he knew. She heard the whispers every time she walked. Though the village, she saw the looks, the pity, the confusion, the cruelty dressed up as concern. Children who had always ignored her now started openly. Women who had never spoken to her now spoke about her constantly. She began to wonder if Koda had made a terrible mistake. She began to wonder if someone is loving. She could reown them. One evening, she went to him and said, what had been living in her chest for weeks. She said, Koda, I have been thinking you are the son of a chief. You deserve a woman this village respects. A woman who makes you look strong, not foolish. I did not want to be the reason they stopped trusting you. She said it without self pity, without drama, just the quiet honesty of a woman who had spent her whole life putting herself the last. Koda was silent for a long time. Then he stood back to the entrance of the dwelling and pointed at the desert sky, vast and dark and absolutely drowning in the stars. He said, Anna, every person in this village looked at that sky and see the same thing. But their winters goes in the frozen dark. You were the only light I could see. I do not need them to understand. I only need you to stop apologizing for existing. She did not speak, but sometime in her eyes shifted like a door that had been bolted shut for years had finally quietly opened. 6 months after choosing a day, a storm came to the valley, and like anything the elders could remember, it arrived without warning in the deep of the night. A wall of wind and rain and lightning that tore through the village like something ancient and angry. Three dwellings collapsed in the first hour. Families scrambled in the darkness, crying out for each other, animals pulling free of their teethers and vanishing into the chaos. In the middle of it all, a child went missing, 4-year-old Captain, the grandson of the very elder who had shaken his head on the choosing day. He had wandered from his family's arms in the confusion and disappeared into the storm black desert. His grandparents screamed out through the wind like a blade. Every warrior in the village grabbed their weapons and torches and ran into the darkness, searching the war. The storm swallowed in their torches almost instantly. Got up, searched for 2 hours. The rain was blinding. The wind stole every sound, and then from somewhere to the east he heard something, a child crying and something else. A voice, low, steady, calm, singing. He ran toward it and found Ayana sitting on the wet ground behind a boulder that blocked the worst of the wind, with little cotton wrapped inside her own blanket against her chest, her arms around him, her voice singing softly into his ear, an old Apache lullaby that Goda had been heard since he was a child himself. She had found him 20 minutes after the storm began. She had been sitting there in the cold and the dark, deepened, keeping him warm and calm and safe, waiting for someone to come. Koda stood in the rain and looked at her and felt something move through his chest that had no name in any language he knew. The elder whose grandson he had saved stood a few feet behind Koda. The old man who had shaken his head on choosing day, and Koda heard him in a voice barely above a whisper say, forgive me, Lord Koda, to Ayana. Word traveled through the village by morning. By the time the storm had cleared and the sun had returned to the red canyon walls, everyone knew what Ayana had done. Not just the night before, but 3 winters ago too, because the elder had gone to Koda and asked him directly, and Koda had finally told the story he had kept for the years. Every word of it. The frozen night, the small fire, the hands that would not stop shaking but did not stop working, the woman who had saved the greatest warrior in the tribe and walked home in the snow and never had a word. The village was quiet for a long time after that, the kind of quiet that only comes when people are sitting with their own shame. The woman who had laughed for choosing day could not look at Anna directly. The men who had questioned God's judgment found they had left nothing to say. And slowly, the way a desert bloom after rain, slowly and completely and almost shockingly, the village began to change around her. Women came to her, dwelling their food. with the fabric, with quiet apologies that came out clumsy and honest. Children began to follow her when she walked through the village, drawn to something in her they could name but could feel. The eldest began to seek her counsel in small matters, then larger ones, and Ayana, who had spent her entire life being invisible, found herself surrounded by a world she had never known and did not quite know how to hold. One night, many months later, when the deserts had cooled and the stars were out in the thousands, Anna sat beside the Koda outside their dwelling and asked him the question she had been carrying once choosing day. She had Koda on that day when you walked past all of them and came to you. Were you afraid of what they could say? He smiled, that rare slow smile that she had come to love more than almost anything. And he said, no. She said, why not? And he was quiet for a moment, looking out at the desert that stretched endless and dark and beautiful before them. Then he said, because I had already seen who you were when nobody was watching, and the person you are when nobody is watching is the truest thing about you. I was not choosing in front of them. I was choosing for the rest of my life. Anna looked at him for a long time, and then she said something she had not done in the longer than she could remember. She laughed, not from the sadness, not from the disbelief, but from the pure, overwhelming, unexpected joy of being truly known by another human being. And Koda, the warrior who had faced 17 battles without flinching, battle that sound moved through him like sunlight through canyon stone, warm, deep, and permanent. And that is the story of Korda and Ayana, the warrior who chose the woman nobody saw, and the woman who had always been worth seeing. They laughed on the choosing day. They laughed because they could not imagine what a broken, quiet, limping girl at the edge of the crowd could possibly offer the greatest warrior among them. But Koda almostly knew nothing, something they could not do, that the most extraordinary people are often found at the edges of things, that true strength is not always loud, that sometimes the person who saves your life does it so quietly, so selflessly, so completely without any expectation that the whole world misses it. But love never does. If the story touched your heart, please give it a like and share it with someone who needs to hear it today. Subscribe to the West Desert Hearts because every week we bring you stories just like this one. Stories that remind you that real love exists, that quiet people carry the most loudest hearts, and that somewhere in this beautiful broken world, someone sees you exactly as you are and chooses you anyway every single time. This was Maria from Western Desert Heart. Good night.